So good morning and welcome to this celebration of Constitution Day. So I hope everybody in the online meeting can also hear us. So good morning and welcome to this celebration for Constitution Day. Uh, as most of you would know, on 26 November 1949, the Constitution of India was formally adopted. Was formally adopted by the Constituent Assembly, but the enforcement of the document happened on January 26, 1950. So obviously, the idea of Republic Day has become more popular over time because we remember 26 January in a far more symbolic way with the annual parade, and obviously those parades happen at the central level, at the state level. So most of us, of course, have very clear memories of how Republic Day is commemorated. But Constitution Day used to be lesser known, but in the recent past, our current government and institutions are now celebrating Constitution Day, not just to remember the event, but also to create greater public awareness about the content of the Constitution and how we can initiate a better public awareness and discussion about its meaning, about its interpretation, and how can we bring it to a larger audience. So Professor Rao was very keen that we should have a meeting to celebrate Constitution Day. So today, in fact, we have planned two activities. The first is this hybrid meeting. Since many students are not here, we obviously had to go for the hybrid model, and some students have joined us online. Some of you who are on campus are with us, so we thank you for participating. And later in the day at 12 o'clock, we are having a short meeting at the Zilla Parishad High School in Shamirpet, where we will be interacting with the students between class 6 to 10. And it will just be a very simple discussion about why a constitution is important in our legal system, why all of us, irrespective of our background, should engage with the constitution. And if any of you are free, and you're most welcome to join us in the Zilla Parishad School at 12 o'clock as well. So for this program, we'll keep it very concise. We'll begin with a collective reading of the preamble. After that, just for a few minutes, since some of our students are also pursuing management studies, I will try to give you a very brief outline of some of the major principles which shaped the framing of the Indian Constitution. Then we have identified 5 students who responded to our call for making short speeches. In fact, there were more students who sent in statements, but I've identified 5 students. So I hope people don't mind the use of discretion in that matter. But out of those 5 students, 2 are here. I identified them just a few minutes ago, and 3 of them have joined us online. So we will request each student to just come up to the podium and speak for 4 or 5 minutes on their ideas for promoting the better public awareness about the Constitution. And in particular, we asked if some of you have specific ideas on what Nalsar can do as an institution to promote awareness about the Constitution. After that, we will have a singing of the national anthem, and we will close our gathering, right? So I would request everybody to stand up, and we will do a collective reading of the preamble. I will display the preamble on the screen, and please read aloud with me. So I will say a few words, you can repeat it, and then we will carry on throughout the text. So I hope those who are with us here can read the text. It's visible? Right. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign democratic republic and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. Thank you very much. So before I invite the students to come and speak, yeah, Professor Reddy has also joined us. Right, morning, sir. So before I invite the students to speak, just a few principles which shaped the drafting of the Constitution. So generally when we teach the constitutional law course for the third year students who are currently away for internships, this is content that we cover with them every year. But usually when we begin the course, we begin with a discussion about the Constituent Assembly debates. Now, the Constituent Assembly debates formally started in December 1946. In fact, 9th December 1946 is an operative day because that is the day on which the Objectives Resolution was first presented. And then, of course, the Constituent Assembly formally sat for nearly 3 years, but it was not a continuous sitting. As you would know, those were very turbulent times. In the middle of 1947, the decision to partition the subcontinent was announced. And obviously, many of the members of the Constituent Assembly were also active politicians who were working and negotiating through the problems of the day. So if you actually read the formal record of the Constituent Assembly debates, the debates are not literally spread out over 3 years. They happen in bits and pieces. So very often the public imagination of the Constituent Assembly is that we had most of our freedom fighters sitting inside the Constituent Assembly. They were discussing and debating the various provisions which have now become the fundamental rights or certain aspects which were continuing from the colonial state and give us the design of government for today. But it's also very important to not just focus on what was said inside the Constituent Assembly, but also to research the social and political history which shaped the drafting of the Constitution. And we are very lucky that in the last 10 to 15 years, there is some very good scholarship which is looking at not just what the members of the Constituent Assembly were saying or what the members of the drafting committee were saying, but also what social movements were saying outside the Constituent Assembly. How did the political events of the time, especially the partition and the integration of the princely states, how did that have an impact on the discussion inside the Constituent Assembly? And of course, you have some towering personalities such as Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, B.N. Rao, Aladi Krishna Swami Iyer, who in fact played a very leading role in the drafting of the text. However, what we must remember is that this document itself is not just the work of a small group of experts. The people who were in the Constituent Assembly, of course, some of them were elected through the British Indian provinces in the 1946 elections. Some were nominated by the princely states. And these days, we often hear the argument that the Constituent Assembly was not democratic enough. We often hear that argument. But political theorists have explained to us that the acceptance of a document or the legitimacy of a document should not be judged only by looking at who were the individual personalities, right, inside the Constituent Assembly. We must also see how the content of the Constitution was being publicly debated and how did it get accepted and how do we internalize it through daily lives and our practices later. So from that point of view, one of the biggest features of the Indian Constitution at that time was that India adopted the principle of universal adult franchise. And even though it might look like a very minor thing in our mind in 2022, India actually was amongst the first few post-colonial countries which gave full voting rights to its entire adult population. There were in fact some European countries which even at that time had not given voting rights to women. And the interesting part is that when the Constituent Assembly was debating this issue, many foreign observers in fact advised many members of the drafting committee not to go for universal adult franchise. Why is that? Because in the colonial legislatures, the voting rights were very limited. Only people with some property or people with school education were eligible to vote. In fact, data shows that in the 1946 elections, only around 12% of the adult population had in fact been considered eligible to vote. In comparison to the 1946 elections for the British Indian provinces, the first Lok Sabha elections which happened over a 4-month period between November 1951 and February 1952, remember there were no EVMs that time, and organizing an election of this scale itself was a huge task which our government took on. And the first Lok Sabha election, in fact, was the largest democratic exercise ever conducted in human history. And we can now confidently say that each time we have our Lok Sabha elections, we are actually conducting the largest democratic exercise in human history. Because certainly there are other countries which are not following the norms of electoral democracy. So Granville Austin, the very well-known American constitutional expert, had visited India in the 60s, and he was amongst the first scholars who was able to systematically read the documents connected to the Constituent Assembly. He was able to get access to the actual debates, statements made by the members of the assembly, and also archival work which showed the correspondence between the various members. So Granville Austin published a book called The Cornerstone of a Nation, The Framing of India's Constitution in 1966, and we still use that book to introduce the field of constitutional law to our students, both in history courses, Agni is here, and also in our constitutional courses. And even if you speak to friends who are studying law or politics in other institutions, this is a book that is being used quite often. So I will just briefly sum up by mentioning three broad principles which Granville Austin mentioned should be considered as the basis of the framing of the Indian Constitution. Now, I think some of you know this, but for those of you who are not aware, I will just take the liberty of outlining these three principles. Granville Austin begins his book by saying that the framing of the Indian Constitution should also be understood in a deep historical context, and it largely reflects the embodiment of three principles. The first was ensuring and building national unity, right? And national unity, of course, was extremely important for a country which, in fact, had been fragmented because of conflicts, because of the religious partition, and the princely states were being integrated, even as the content of the constitution was being debated. So the emphasis on building national unity was definitely the defining feature of the Indian Constitution, because you were essentially reconstructing a nation state for the future. The second principle we've already spoken about was the idea of building a deep electoral democracy, right? A deep electoral democracy means that apart from regular elections, which is the main method of electing your government, there should also be ideas of public accountability and constant public dialogue about the functions of government. So building the institutions of democracy was the second large principle which Granville Austin emphasizes is the basis of the Indian Constitution. And the third idea, which I guess we are still struggling with at many levels, is the idea of bringing about social reform. So Dr. Ambedkar's influence is very clear in not just the drafting of the equality provisions in the Constitution, but also in specific anti-discrimination provisions, which were in fact far ahead of their time, even if you compare it with constitutions that were being drafted at the same time. So Granville Austin begins his book by outlining the three principles of building national unity, deepening democracy, and bringing about social reform as the three principles through which you should read and understand the Constitution. Now, the reason I said it is because many people who are outside the legal field feel that us lawyers and law teachers, we have somehow monopolized the language of the Constitution, right? Or, as some of our students have also said in the written statements, we often discuss the Constitution in language or jargon which the majority of the population does not understand. So we, of course, have to think of ways, think of methods to work through that image. We have to break down and simplify the language of the Constitution. But one way of starting that conversation is to first begin with principles. Because sometimes, if you ask people to straight away read the text and to ask them to engage with what the content of the articles of the Constitution say, that method may not work with a large audience. So a more effective way would be to perhaps emphasize principles which are rooted in the process of the framing of the Constitution. And then, of course, like any other text, the text has to be modified, it has to be interpreted, and the text also is changed over time. So it is a topic on which one can go on and on, but that is definitely not the purpose of this meeting. So I now invite some of our students to just offer their remarks based on the statements that they had written. So I think there are some students online, so we will start with them. So I think the first student who I had in my list was Rashika Bodh. So Rashika, if you can hear us, you can unmute yourself.
Yes. Hi, sir. Can you hear me?
Right. Yes, we can hear you. Do you want to turn your video on?
Yes, sir.
Right. So Rashika is currently in the third year BA LLBs too. So Rashika, we can hear you, but you'll have to speak a little louder.
Oh, yes, sir. Sure. Hi, good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well on this Saturday. I'm from the third year and thankful enough to be speaking in front of you. So yeah, the question that was asked by us in Siddharth sir's email was, how can we improve public awareness about the Constitution, and what can institutions such as Nalsar do to promote better public engagement? So when I first saw that question, the word that stood out was public engagement. Now, we have to keep in mind that public is not like us. They don't carry bare acts, and they're not fortunate enough to get Sid Sir's lectures on constitutional morality and Granville Austin and all that. So we have to be very simple with them. They don't get a prescribed 72 or 74-hour course on the constitutional law. So I think that can only begin when you start really, really, really simple. And it's kind of it's very contrasting, like putting the words constitution and simple together, because I know for a fact that at least for me, the constitution can never be a very simple document. It's very complex, very deep. If you literally article 21 itself, it feels like a competition of how much you can zoom into that zone. So I would say, when I talk about starting simple, just make sure that people first know that there exists a constitution. As much as we like to think that we have developed, I bet that there are many people in this country who still don't know that there is something called a constitution or a samvidhan that exists, and that gives them so many rights that they can't even fathom that they have those rights. And in order and o- you can only tackle a violation of a right, and you can do something about it, going a writ petition or going to the police or talking to people, when you know that that right exists to begin with. You have to know about the existence of something to first to deal with it. So I would say grassroots engagement, of course, like going to schools, going to panchayats. In fact, going to many villages, at least in my area, have these things called self-help groups of women. They're called Swayam Sahayata groups, Swayam Sahayata Samoos in from where I come from. So people like them. You have to target groups first, and then this is India, of course. Once you say something, we live in a society, things will spread out. So go there first, just like tell them that, okay, this is the constitution, this is the document that gives you this right, this basic things. You start at least, like, they should know that, okay, there's something called right to equality, there is something called right to life. They might not understand everything. We still don't understand everything, even after putting so many hours into it, but at least they should know that it exists. So start with that. And there was one lecture that we did. There was this one lecture series that we did where the Keshav Nanda Bharati case was taught to us. Of course, we all might think that we knew that case really well, but the speaker that came, what he did was he took volunteers, students, and he turned them into judges. He made someone Indira Gandhi. He made someone the lawyer, and it was just really engaging. So activities like that can be done in schools, and all and activities like that will make sure that what we are trying to do doesn't turn out to be a boring lecture about the constitution, but something more engaging, something very simple, and something very inclusive. Because we have to keep in mind that we don't want to create a complicated lecture series about the constitution, but we want to make it simple, and we want to make sure that people feel a part of it. People feel like they are contributing to what we are trying to do here. So yeah, basically discussion, simple and very basic discussions about this. It all starts with the discussion. Then one more, I'm sure, I think just one more idea. I'm not sure if I've crossed the time limit, but just one more idea which which I have was that we can create a storybook, like a proper storybook of with illustrations, with short, like bubble-headed, those kind of storybooks for children, or like middle-aged children at least, about the Constitution, like those remember those comics, like the Chacha Chaudhary, Archie comics ish things. We can perhaps create one for children by Nalsar, and possibly we can publish that for that. I think that will be a great service. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for listening.
Right. Thank you, Rashika. Thank you. We will collect all your ideas, and we will try to act on some of them. The next student is Akhil Surya. He's also a third year student. Akhil, are you there in the meeting? I can see your name.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
I'm here.
Can you turn on your video?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes, we can hear you, Akhil. You can go on now.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Professor Rao, first of all, for conducting this session. This was much needed, sir. And if I may put the suggestion, I also wish if we can have reading spaces or study circle for discussing such issues, because at the end of the day, it can't just be one-sided. I think these kind of solutions have to come from the group with collective decision making. So that suggestion I'd like to put forth in the first instance. As we all know, we're here to celebrate this Constitution Day, to remind ourselves of the past, to remind ourselves of the history that went behind in the making of this Constitution, while simultaneously trying to protect, enhance, and promote our Constitution. I actually had a few words planned on what Constitution is and what its culture is, but Professor Chavan has saved me from doing that work. I thank you, sir. I wish to talk mainly from my experience, my internship, and my interactions with NGOs and various collectives from this nation. I wish to share those reflections I have. The first thing was I was a part of a consultation session among 40 NGOs and collectives from all corners of this nation, working on various social issues like manual scavenging, sexual and reproductive rights, and also child educational rights. One thing that was emerging from all of these people, of all the individuals I was interacting with, who are representing their organizations, that there is a fear that they think the constitution is failing. They think the constitution exists only for a namesake. They think the country is in a threat, an extreme threat that only a constitution can save them. So, this public perception, while it's hard to understand why they think so, we must not stop to attempt uh, to understand why they think so. If they think constitution is in danger and it's failing them, that's a great call for us to think. I think it's never been happened. Like in 75 years of our constitution, I don't think a large section of our society felt like the constitution was at peril. Now that is a huge wake up call for all of us. Through the session, I've learned and unlearned a lot of things, which was particularly enlightening in that sense. I found two common but very important things when the organizations were trying to put forth the challenges they face on a day-to-day basis. One thing is academic resource, that they know what their issue is, they know how to fight for it, they know that they have to fight for it. But what they lack is the argumentative potential, being able to speak the constitution's language, being to imbibe the value into them. That is basically internalizing the constitution, as Professor Chauhan was putting it. And the second was human resource, that you have people who did not receive any formal education, but they have a good sense of the society. They know what the issues are, they know what social and economic rights they need, but they often lack educated individuals that can assist and drive this cause. So this is where I think Nalsar and the like institutions should bear upon themselves the active duty of reaching out. We did not wait for organizations to come knocking at our doors for help. I do think we have that resource. We do have those individuals that can reach out and help them. To sum up, academic resource that can serve as a weapon for fighting further social issues and rights violations, and human resource in form of individuals who are committed to this cause with an active interest are the immediate necessity. Secondly, moving on, I personally think teaching, which perhaps we can call it preaching, constitutional values and rights through pedagogical interventions and academic workshops might seem like an attractive venture, but it cannot be all. At the same time, only asking what Nalsar can do also obscures a flaw inherent in our own understanding of the Constitution. That we need to know that academic reading is not the only reading that we can give to it. In my interaction, when people representing NGOs, the one problem they kept highlighting is people in rural areas, people who face issues on a day to day basis, are very unwilling to learn about the Constitution. So when you try and attempt to educate themselves on the Constitution, the first question they ask is, how is it going to help me? How is it going to help me solve these problems? So it might seem very attractive to preach the idea of untouchability as a doctrine to them, people who face caste discrimination on a day-to-day basis. But they hardly lack that collective force to work against it. So the question again is, what incentive do they have? What outcome are they getting out of this? And this, I think, where two things can be done here. NGOs and collectives that are working, if there are any people working for NGOs here, I'd like to put this forward. One thing we could do is relate constitutional law and today's socio and political issues. When you link issues and problems they face on a day-to-day basis, and then tell them this is how constitution is trying to protect you, this is what we're trying to do to you, and then when that consensus happens between the issues and what you're trying to preach, then you will see not just educated individuals but also individuals who are using constitution as a weapon, who are using it for their own cause. I think this is needed. And one personal experience I faced was my interaction with an organization called Tamate. It's based in Bangalore. They work mainly for the rights of manual scavengers. So one interesting thing I found was their issues, what they're fighting for and what they're doing, is rarely not in the constitution. They know manual scavenging is the most degrading form of work. They know that they're discriminated in every home they go to. They're not served water. But what does constitution mean to them? It doesn't mean anything in the sense that it does not constitute formal constitutional literacy. That they know what they have, but they don't know if it's there in the constitution. And even if they do, they don't know how to put that forward. But one interesting thing that still emerged from this discussion was them teaching me, a student of constitutional law, after having gone through 80 hours of constitutional law, was them teaching what constitution is to them and what it can be to them. If you have accepted that there can be multiple interpretations to this constitution, we must step out of the classroom and see what these people think of the constitution. We cannot be thinking from this room to try and promote the constitution out there. If the challenges exist out there, solution also has to come from there. And in this sense, I think we must believe in solidarity, not charity. Solidarity, we have to cultivate and promote it. It is horizontal in nature and it's very collaborative. Charity, on the other hand, is very vertical in its approach and nature. And charity is something that I wish we would avoid. Only then, through carrying a sensibility that this reading is not all, it's neither the best, and engaging in active collaboration, we will place the constitution where it was always meant to be, the people. The people is the first phrase that the preamble uses, we the people of India. And that phrase, I think, is very important given our current political context because it signifies three things. If I get the additional minute to summarize it, first thing is we, the people of India, give ourselves this constitution. It was representative in that sense. The source of sovereignty is itself the people. And we, the word we in we the people, signifies a great idea of fraternity and associated living, which is something we lack in today's political context with the rampant rise of hate speech and divisive politics. And the second idea is people, which is something we tend to ignore a lot because for the first time, Constitution has declared personhood and dignity to all. So these three things taken together and carrying that sensibility that we gave ourselves this constitution, we means everyone in this nation, and people means recognizing each other with dignity. So carrying this sensibility in us and trying to find solutions coming from the problem itself, that's how I think we can bring public engagement with the constitution. Thank you, sir.
Thank. Okay. Thank you, Akhil, for your very thoughtful remarks. Right. Yeah. Right, sir. Please. Yeah, please, sir. Right.
So, good morning and welcome to one and all. Greetings to the Constitutional Day celebrations to all of us. So I know Constitution, like two students I heard, Constitution is different for different people. I know Indian Constitution, when it comes, it's like paradise for lawyers and waste paper for common man. That kind of sayings also there. So background of Constitution, like drafting committee, what Chavan was talking about, it took almost 3 years. 2 years, 11 months, 18 days it took, and more than 400 people participated, and a lot of the philosophy went on that. But finally, we adopted, on 1949, 26th day of November 1949. 73 years we have done, but lot of retrospection we have to do through, of course, constitution. Why constitution? Question comes actually, it's being a fundamental law, basic law. So all laws comes from, emanates from the constitution. So one, being a citizen of India, I think we should know. We all know that we are all legal fraternity. Ignorance of law is no excuse. Similarly, ignorance of constitution is no excuse because it is a fundamental law of the land. So that's where I know we have to. So when it comes to Indian constitution, being the world's largest constitution or bulkiest constitution, one difficult question, all of us, I don't know, I'm not a constitutional expert, but to ask, how many, it's a being a lengthiest constitution, how many provisions we have, it's a very difficult. I don't know, Professor Siddharth can discuss, but originally it was like 395 articles, 8 schedules, then we have like that. But today, being a comprehensive constitution, it is like, I think 1,17,360 words if you put, that kind of thing. But today, I don't know, I am ignorant, but just to know from you, Siddhartha or others, I think latest we have a 448 articles, 25 parts and 12 schedules. More than 100 amendments we have, this is what, but it's being a living document and, lot of aspiration, the people have to be included because being a important document. So that way we have done all these more than 100 amendments, including the aspirations of the people. Law has to change according to the societal needs, depend on the socio-economic political conditions of the country. So I think it's true with Indian constitution, taking into consideration of those things. I think we have made these more than 100 amendments, including all to be part of the constitution. That's what I feel. I don't know whether Siddharth will tell what I said is correct or not, because every time it's changing. It's a difficult question to answer, but what I understand as I don't know. Again, I'm not constitutional expert, but as a citizen of the country, I should know the constitution. So that is what I feel, about the constitution. But I said different people have different perceptions. I'm not going to that. But definitely the constitution, if you look at silent features of the constitution, start from the federalism to rule of law to then sovereign, socialistic, secular, democratic, all these things are now part of the Indian constitution, I think. So finally, again, to say that, I believe that ignorance of constitution is no excuse. I know different people have this thing. But what is the way of telling? Like 2 students I heard. So what we believe in Nalsar is academic social responsibility as a law institution. How we can promote that? So earlier we worked part of the academic social responsibility. We took up a lot of drafting legislation to many things to reaching people. For example, we know Center for Tribal Land Rights. We have taken up a lot of projects reaching to the people. Actually, today it's quoted by central government. So more than 1 million people got benefited with the intervention of Nalsar in helping the land, poor tribal people. So similar thing, we can think of something, reaching the people. That's what my idea about, propagating the constitution. So with this, thank you, Siddhartha, and thank you everyone giving me this opportunity. Thank you. Sir,
Thank you, Professor Balakissa Reddy, for spending some time with us. We have one more student who has joined the online meeting. I think Pradyuman Singh. Pradyuman, can you please turn on your video?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I hope I'm audible and visible.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Right. A very good morning to one and all. Firstly, at the outset, I'd like to thank a new Vice Chancellor, Professor Rao, and the other faculty, Siddharth sir, other faculty present here who actually organized this event on the Constitutional Day. Because I think that this is one of the most important steps into actually creating public awareness. Because to be very honest, like on the 26th of November, I've spent 12 years in school and not even a single time such a thing has been celebrated. So I think this is the first and foremost very important step, is to actually make people aware by recognizing the important events in the Constitution, by celebrating Constitutional Day and having and facilitating discussions like this.
Moving on, I'd like to say that in my opinion, if we want to create public awareness among people regarding the Constitution of India, we need to have different strategies and different methods for different age groups. So, firstly, I think that if we talk about students who are studying in school right now, because most of the formative education takes place there only. So, I had the opportunity to take up humanities in my 11th and 12th grade, and I had subjects like political science. And because of that, I was a bit aware about the constitution. I had certain familiarity with it. But having interacted with my peers back then in school who opted for other streams, I think there was a dearth of knowledge about the Indian Constitution. Even basics of the Indian Constitution, people in school are not aware of. And it is only if you take up subjects like political science that you're taught the Indian Constitution. Whereas in our CBSE curriculum, almost all the books starting from 6th grade itself start with a preamble of our Constitution. But then again, because there's no teaching that is concentrated particularly on the Indian Constitution, people are not aware in their formative years, and they tend to carry forward this ignorance throughout their life. So I think the number one effort needs to start from the grassroots level itself, that is schools. Quizzes, discussions, role plays, public events like dramas need to take around the constitution, making people aware of the same. As mostly a lot of quizzes that we have in our school, a lot of discussions are based around the subject of science or mathematics. I think it's very important if the schools take up this initiative to having discussions, quizzes in the formative years of students around the Constitution of India, making them understand the basic principles, as it is not very easy to understand the text of the Constitution for a student in school. So I think if we make them familiar with the principles on which our Constitution is based on, then we can carry forward this education going ahead. I think another very important thing could be that schools should engage practical learning regarding and surrounding the Constitution of India. That is, that when I was in school, some of my seniors started this initiative wherein we formed a legal awareness club. People who had an inclination towards law, who had opted for humanities, or who any which ways were interested knowing about the law in our country, they came about and started this particular club. And then we took permission from our school authorities to facilitate field trips. We went to NGOs. We also interacted with certain legal aid groups. And then, having interacted with them, knowing how grassroots level works take place around the Constitution of India, how they make people aware about their rights by going into villages, by talking to people, then we started this initiative by making the domestic help that was there in our house, and maids and people who served us in the school. We told them about their certain rights, such as how their children had a right to a right to engage in free education that is guaranteed by our constitution under Article 21A to children between 6 to 14 years. So making people aware about having interaction discussions, I think this can be one thing that can be taken up by schools. The other important group that we need to make aware about the constitution is people who are going to work, who are office goers, who generally are not in schools, are not engaged in any formal education setup right now. What we can do is, like, certain programs, such as if we talk about the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, it did help in creating a substantial amount of awareness among people with regards to cleanliness. So I think if we have these national campaigns wherein people are made aware about their duties, where are they're made aware about these rights, can go a long way. Another thing is that, for example, something that I come from Gurgaon in Haryana, so something that takes place in our city on Sundays is a Rahagiri Day, wherein certain parts of the most busiest roads are closed, and then people are only allowed to walk there, cycle there. Then it's followed by certain, Nukkad Nataks. People engage in discussions. So Nukkad Nataks, people being made aware through these campaigns, wherein people gather on weekends, these things can be taken up so that on a mass level, there's awareness that is created among people. Similarly, one experience that I'd like to share is that when I was interning back in May with a lawyer in Delhi, she used to work around education related matters, and she also used to take up pro bono cases. So, in one of the field trips, what we realized is that even after the government in Delhi has formulated proper formal policy wherein there's a formal structure for people coming from underprivileged backgrounds to be enrolled in private schools and gain the same amount of education in a private unaided school in Delhi. People who could avail this facility for their children who were among the age group of 6 to 14 were not even aware of this right, let alone be the process of how to go about, how to apply, how to take up forms, and then make have their children admitted in a private school. So I think it is very important that people are made aware through efforts such as us who were fortunate enough to know about the in and outs of the constitution through the various courses and teachings that we have in our college. Lastly, just concluding, I think what we as students at Nalsar can do, as this, I think it's a very great initiative by the college itself, where after 12 they'll be going on to in a Zilla Parishad school and talking to children about it. So I think these efforts should be made more frequent, wherein we pass on our education and our awareness of the constitution not only to school students but also going to people who probably reside in residential communities, going to people and talking to, even as a matter of fact, the help that is engaged in our college, the maids and all the other staff that helps us, by talking to them and making them aware of what their rights are. So I think this is a bare minimum initiative that we as law students of Nalsar can undertake from our end. So that's about it from my end. Thank you so much for being a patient audience.
Thank you, Pradyuman, for participating and offering your thoughts. We have two students here in the room, so I'll invite them one by one. Eskandita is currently a second year IPM student. Maybe you want to come up to the podium?
A very good morning, everybody. Firstly, I would like to thank Professor Rao and Professor Chauhan for conducting this event here. So it has been almost 7 decades since the Constitution of India was enacted, enforced, and all of it began. But then when we look at things today, the common man sails very far away from actually knowing about what goes in the Constitution. Now, people know there's a Constitution, right? Now, we are sitting here. I say it from the perspective of an IPM student here, because most of the peers here are law students. So we know there's a constitution, we know there are rights, we know there are duties. We've all studied it in school, fundamental rights, fundamental duties. We know that it exists. And then it ends there. So we always interact with certain parts of the constitution, whether it be in terms of particular portions, right? But then not an in-depth study of it. Now, there can be many reasons for it, but then the basic principle again comes is that people in general are aware. They know that there are rights, they know that there are duties, but the levels of interpretation of those rights and the levels of interpretations of do you know what goes in the constitution and the mechanism and the functioning of all of it, it is confined to a particularly niche audience, right? And that becomes the problem there. So the first step, or I think the entire situation can be caused upon and solved in a threefold solution, which talks about the 3 A's, is what I call it: awareness in terms of access and accountability. Now, how do you create awareness, right? So we are studying in a law school here. We have our own section. We are very fortunate that we have subjects such as constitution and business and political science. So we get that awareness. How do we channelize it to others? So we go around spreading the word. We already have a lot of, let's say, clubs and communities. So as my peers also mentioned about, let's say, Nukkad Natak, street plays. We have podcast series coming up. So talk about those issues in local languages. I think the biggest problem comes in is that we discuss these issues, but most of the times those are limited only to the classrooms or to the academic setup. So getting those discussions beyond the classrooms and getting it into your household, among your peer groups. Let's say you go back to the room. Let's say if there's a CAA protest happening somewhere, let it not be confined only to the screen that you see, but then it goes beyond that and comes to the room. And also you discuss why this is happening, why people are protesting, what are the rights, what are the duties, what can I do to make sure someone who's needing, let's say, legal aid, I'm studying in this institution, how can I provide that? How can I make that more accessible? So all these things do play a role. Also, apart from that, providing education, providing short-term courses. Like we already have full-fledged degrees. Institutions like Nalsar do provide that. I personally also recently took up this constitutional law course. I don't think many of my peers might be aware, but there's a particular constitutional law course. So going around, like spreading the word that there are courses available, making those things available to school students as well. Because I think school is a place where you basically start the foundation for all of this education to happen, right? So if a child is being taught about these things in school, you'll obviously go back home and talk about it. That household discussion happens. Once that household discussion happens, then you start talking about it. The problem is we stop talking about things after a particular point of time because we obviously get ignorant that okay, let it be, kya farak padta hai, because we think there are already certain people who will take care of it. But the point is that until we don't start taking care of those things, no one will. So all I want to say here is Rabindranath Tagore in the poem, where the mind is without fear, talked about the lines "heaven of freedom" when he described the country, and "heaven of freedom" also entailed all the values which are mentioned in the preamble. Let those values not just be confined to the readings of the preamble, but also be interpreted in the way when we talk about equality. What is equality? What is liberty? What is justice? What is fraternity? Let these not be just mere words. The most important thing there is to begin talking about it. You don't talk about it, it all ends there. You start talking about it, more people come and join because everyone has different ideas. So all of this together, I think, would be a good step. And institutions, educational institutions, and institutions like Nalsar are the ones which will actually ignite the spark because we have the platform to provide all of it. It's like the bedrock, and then the plant grows out of it. So I think that is what is necessary. Thank you so much.
No, we can promise you that even if you are studying the management program, the influence of law and social sciences will continue to be strong and well into the future. So the last student speaker we have is Najad, who's in the LLM program. Please come up.
think don't think I came with a prepared note or something, but just to have a brief idea. Actually, I'm very proud and happy to stand with Rao Sir VC and in front of all you. Actually, like all other previous speakers said, most of the uh, fundamental things which needs discussion in this gathering has been already said by Siddharth sir. Actually, I want to just mention when I was watching a documentary, Professor Ubendra Bakshi was referring to that time to India. India, a country born in Holocaust, and like if we go into that time, like Siddhartha was mentioning, 1946, we started our venture of creating a document on 1946, and people from various parts of this country came together, means elected from not maybe not a too democratic process, but they came from various parts of the country, and they decided to start to write the future of the country. But that between that first meeting and the second meeting in 14th of 1947 and the actual starting of the sitting, the continuous sitting in December of 1947, between that there was this Holocaust, the partition, and the people who were actually supposed to be sitting in that Constituent Assembly means most of them went to Karachi, and that was the premise where this document was being made. And actually, it was in terms and conditions negotiated between the people of India, to be precise, maybe. And the people sat for a long time, and they discussed. If we go into the Constituent Assembly debates as of now, it is very illuminating, and it will speak to us with all the contemporary issues that we are hearing. And Nehru was very precise about that hope of the country. And I'll just read the last part of his introductory speech in the Constituent Assembly. He was saying that, but at present, the greatest and most important question in India is how to solve the problem of poor and the starving. Wherever we turn, we are confronted with this problem. If we cannot solve this problem soon, all our paper constitutions will become useless and purposeless. Keeping this aspect in view, who could suggest to us to postpone and wait? And this was in 1950 or 1949, when 1947, when they were started to prepare a document. And that was the hope. They had the hope, but they had this despair in their mind. So in 2022, in 26 November of 26, we have we still have that despair in our mind. So as we celebrate Constitutional Day, the what supposed to be doing is the reading of the preamble and reaffirming of the commitment that we uphold to that ideology. So to be precise with this time, I'll focus on two substantive things that I constantly thought of after coming into Nalsar, and we discuss each other what to do with what you call to improve the constitutional awareness or the constitutional commitment in the larger public. Then I'll differ with one of my previous speakers, who is a public, and public is not one who resides outside this university. I believe the public is us, and we are the bits and pieces of that public, and the institution gets that public inside just before them for 3 or 5 years. And if I go into the statistics, every institution of national character, like Nalsar, gets students from various parts for 5 years. And on an average, 5,000 students comes to all these institutions every year, and they pass out the same amount of students pass out every year. So if we can nurture the constitutional values in them, that is the fundamental and foremost and the only thing that substantively the institutions can do. Then I'll focus on that one point. The first point is the imbibing the constitutional values. And how can that do? Like Nalsar is a very good example that we did our accessibility lab. That is a promise that Constitution gives to our students, to the people, and that we imbibe. And the other one that the institutions can do is the reasonable accommodation of various religions and the languages. That too are very express commitments that Constitution provides for the citizens, and that institutions often lack to promise to the students. So my point here is the institutions of national character should imbibe the constitutional values in their administration, and that can nurture the values in the students, that can inspire the students. And the second point, that would be the public condemnation of unconstitutional incidents. That I take that point as technical as it is. If we suppose we have an example of if some incident happens of racial or caste discrimination in an institution, the institution should come forward to publicly condemning that incident and upholding and reaffirming that such students and every students in this institution, in that institution, have that right guaranteed by the Constitution. And that will inspire the whole community, all students in that institution, and that can pass on and on to the larger, to the breadth of this nation. And my idea, the overall idea is this: if the condemnation happens in public, and the statement, if the institutions release a public statement and it stands forward, it comes forward with a public condemnation of unconstitutional events, that will inspire the whole nation. Like we had institutions like JNU and all, when the nation when any unconstitutional events happens in the country, those institutions come forward in agitation. We were very what you call in 2019 we were evidencing that uh, in Kerala, I had an experience in the times of CAA. We students from law college were traveling. Means many students were associated with many groups of means public NGOs or public societies, and they were traveling across the state. Taking classes for smaller groups, like reaffirming their right, and they were requesting what is our right, okay, what is going to happen, what is the citizenship act, what is going to happen if something happens, what's happening when NRC comes. And we the law students were there for teaching, and they were there in need. And if I can conclude my point, uh, the national institutions should be guiding lights in this country. And I remember a poem of Allama Muhammad Iqbal, and I'm not sure whether the language is very correct. I mean, outside I'm from Kerala, and I don't know the language is very true and all. The poem goes like this: Gartanda desh hawa zamane mein jalane wale jalate hai charagh aakhir. Even if the wind blows harder, wind of the period blows, one who lights the lamp will continue the light. If we can dream of a nation where the national institutions are lightning with the values of the constitution, that can be the future of this country. Thank you.
So thanks, Najad, for reflecting on your own experiences also. I must mention that when the CA protests were happening, even our students did a symbolic gathering here. But the question is that sometimes when electoral politics and social solidarity comes into tension with each other, very often we also have to be practical or pragmatic in the way in which we can put forward our points. So it's a very complicated issue because remember the debate between Gandhi and Ambedkar was also on whether you should be protesting against your own elected government or not. And sometimes the path of agitation may not be the best option if you're trying to convince people in power to make decisions or to make reforms. But obviously, there is another view which says that if you don't confront authority, if you don't ask difficult questions, then change will not happen. So it's a dilemma. It's a philosophical dilemma. It's also a dilemma that is relevant for different lines of work. When we grow older inside organizations, then sometimes we have to disregard our own past selves and learn to work within the institutions as well. So I will now request Professor Rao to have a few words. And I must mention that it was Sir who was very keen that we must celebrate Constitution Day. So hopefully now we can make it an annual program. But not just have the annual program, but also think about many of the practical steps that we can take to enhance awareness about the Constitution.
My dear colleagues, friends, I'm happy that we are today celebrating the Constitution Day. Constitution is not just only a secret document for a lawyers, law students, or bureaucrats, or those who are interpret in power or out of power. Constitution is a So Constitution, which I see as a document which is essential in the governance and interpretation. Today, whatever is the Supreme Court is supreme. It's because of the Constitution and the judicial power. And also, let me just go back to when the India gained independence from the colonial rule. Famous Nehru's speech, Tryst with Destiny, in the midnight of 14th, 15th August 1947. We have gained independence. But where is our rule of law document? Where is our basic document? That was a mammoth exercise, Siddharth said, and all of you spoke about. And we are happy, delighted. The people of India have sat almost 3 years. And any student, not only just a law student, you must read the Constitutional Assembly debate. You look at whenever the Supreme Court or anyone has any debate, discussion, or a confusion about any of the article of the Constitution, where is the Bible? You go back to the Constitutional Assembly. It will enrich you as a scholar, as a student. So therefore, I must advocate that all of you must read. First, start with the Bare Act. And we have seen the preamble. You know, that's not just opening words, as somebody said, when you see the Tagore's poem, it's like a poem. Look at the words carefully, they have been drafted. Preamble which speaks about the essence of the Constitution. So that's a great document. It's not just for X, Y, Z. It's for all. That's one. Second, as when we law students, when we started reading in our graduation in law, we said golden triangle, theory of golden triangle. Article 14, Article 19, Article 21. Amazing. You look at any old, new, any case, classic, landmark. Article 14, right to equality. Article 19, freedoms. Article 21, amazing. It's a mini constitution. Article 21 is Professor Upendra Bakshi said we do not have one constitution, several constitutions. So that's the essence. So constitution is a real, let's say, document which all of us must read, understand, analyze, try to interpret. And in jurisprudence, we call as a grand norm, basic law. All laws, rules, every provision has to be tested on the touchstone of the Constitution. That's the greatness. That's the greatness of the judicial power. So all of you spoke about, and Siddharth has beautifully explained that Constitution is a living document. It ensures aspirations of the people. And both American Constitution, Indian Constitution starts with the words, we the people of India. And it has immense historical, political, and theoretical significance, conceptual significance. That's what when the debate comes, for whom this Constitution is made, it's very clear. Also, it was written in the backdrop of freedom struggle to accomplish 3 key goals. Siddharth mentioned about the 3 goals where the great constitutional jurist has mentioned about. So this was a 3 key goals I'll try to briefly mention. The first is providing political freedom from colonial rule. And it has enormous significance at that time. Ensuring fundamental rights. Amazing, part 3. Also reminding the state duties to implement directive principles of state policy. When we were the law students, we were looking at whether part 3, part 4, debate, which will overrule. Now we have seen even part 4 is read into the part 3. So that's the first key goal, is that political freedom is from the colonial rule, ensuring fundamental rights, principles of directive principles. Second is roadmap for social and economic development, and to address the long pending issues of poverty, illiteracy, allocation of resources to the people. That's the second key goal. Third is, that's a major fundamental in the governance, is to ensure equality to all people and prevent discrimination on the basis of caste, religion, gender, and several others. And we know always there is a tension between text and context. That's there in the Indian Constitution also. This recurrent tension between the text and context. And whenever we are in doubt, we go back to the founding fathers, their vision of the Constitution, and in the context of changing circumstances and social values. I'll just give two latest cases in this regard, how this tension is resolved. Several things you can give it. You can mention about the landmark cases of the Indian Supreme Court. But this tension is resolved by the Indian Supreme Court as a final protector, guarantor, and interpreter of the Constitution. One is Navtej Johar case, all of you know, 2018, which found section 377 of IPC is unconstitutional and refused to adopt formalistic interpretation of Article 15. Amazing, you must read. You must read as a law students. In fact, that is what all law schools have inherited from the American case law method. Whenever you want, read the original text of the case. Don't read the excerpts. Read the original text and then you develop your own view, your own perspective. So 377, the Navtej Johar 5-judge constitutional bench said, refused to adopt formalistic interpretation of Article 15 and stated that sex discrimination cannot operate in isolation from other identities and particularly from socio-political economic context. And when you read Navtej, don't read alone, isolation. Read Delhi High Court, then which was a case which was appealed over the Delhi High Court judgment and then came back to the final 2018. Even now, 2018, Navtej Johar is not complete in several aspects. It just focused only one aspect of the discrimination and struck down section 377. Second, I like to mention about the notion of substantive equality. I think 2020, Lieutenant Colonel Nitisha versus Union of India. It's the first time granted the permanent commission in Indian Army for women. That's what text, context. Hopefully we will see many more these tensions may be resolved. Maybe what will happen, we have to see in future. But this is what always there is a tension between text and context. As a students also, you should remember this. Don't read the bare text. Look at the context, social, economic, and political context. So some of these two decisions and several others of the Indian Supreme Court reflect that Constitution is a living document. It's not just static, it responds to changes and changing needs of the social, political, economic context. The future of constitutionalism will depend upon the Indian experiment. Really, no, we should not look at that India as internal critique is look at, but external all over India, look at all over the world. All over the world is watching towards the India, how it is performing, whether it's a G20, whether international level. Recently, when I was there on 10th November in Geneva, 115 countries sat in the Universal Periodic Review. Morning we had the UK presented the UPR report and the fourth cycle full, and then afternoon India. None of them went out. They're watching, they're observing, internal critique, external critique, but India really is a leader, global leader. So therefore, the future of constitutionalism will depend upon Indian experiment. It is our collective responsibility to understand, analyze, and introspect working of the Constitution. So therefore, as I said, it's necessary for all of us to understand the Constitution, which, as I said, is not a secret book only for lawyers, judges, or bureaucrats. It's all of us. The celebration of Constitution Day is a step towards advancement of constitutional culture in India. I think some of you may be aware, may not aware, the court and constitution, which we have started 3-4 years ago, is a unique experiment. I think we will be doing in February once again. And it's the only law school in India which conducts on the court and constitution, which invites several judges, lawyers, and many other people and jurists all over India. So that we will do. We will also do, as some of you have suggested, the legal aid and disseminating more about not only the constitution, but other important laws, rules, and other. That's our duty. We have to educate all others. That we will do, and then we will see what are the best other forms of disseminating the constitution and the legal culture, and which is necessary. So I thank everyone present here today. Thank you.
So I thank Professor Rao for offering his thoughts. Obviously, it's the start of a new innings for Sir here, but he has been at Nalsar many years ago. But with time, institutions also change and the challenges change. And we would definitely need the cooperation of all students and colleagues to try and push forward what Nalsar can do, not just in the teaching side, but as many people have said in their statements, in terms of our extension activities, in terms of not only public engagement at large, but also in terms of independent knowledge contributions. So there are a lot of things that we have to look forward to, and we would require solidarity even within the institution to pursue those goals. So now we will conclude the program with the national anthem. I should mention that for the students who did take part, we will be sending you certificates from the Department of Legal Affairs. As soon as we receive them, or when the students are back, others are back, we can have a physical presentation. And there are also some books on constitutional law, which we will hand out to the students, but not today, right? So when we get the certificates from the Department of Legal Affairs, we will inform you, and we will have a short presentation with Professor Rao in a few days. So we'll play the anthem. I would request everybody to stand up.
जनगणमन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंधु गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल गंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्छल जलधि तरंगा तब शुभ नामे जागे तब शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तब जय गाथा जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे.
So we thank all of you for participating.